Hi guys, hope all of us are doing great. My name is Ernest. I'd like to welcome each and every one of us to my channel of Ernest Sciences and Mathematics TV channel. In our channel, we deal with different topics in sciences and mathematics. And today we are going to look at one of the topics in the human anatomy. And that basically falls under the category of excretion and homeostasis. But basically, we're going to be biased on the human renal system. Now, I'd like, before we proceed, to request some of our members and viewers, kindly go to YouTube, search Ernest Sciences and Mathematics TV channel. Join us and subscribe to our channel so that we can be getting updates on our various uploads that we do in these various subjects that I've mentioned. So today we're going to look at this particular a set of the human anatomy, which basically is going to be a discussion on the renal system. And this particular topic is relevant for us in order to understand how different parts of the body coordinate together to ensure that there is sustainability and the overall concept of life. So in this particular case, we are going to look at how the environment around a cell inside the body is facilitated to work normally. And we're going to look at how the body is structured in a way that it's going to, of course, facilitate the removal of metabolic wastes, and of course maintenance of this particular set of what I've referred to as an environment is coordinated. So we're going to look at different sections of the renal system, which is going to assist us, of course, to appreciate the overall concept of excretion and homeostasis in man. We had earlier on, of course, defined in some of our videos the concept of excretion. And we said that the excretion basically is the process whereby waste materials of metabolism are removed from the body of an organism. Now, we had said that there are different set of organs that we can be able to, of course, refer or regard as excretory organs. But the main ones that we're going to see today, which is playing this particular overall role as an excretory organ, is basically the kidney, or rather the renal system that we're going to mention. Now, in this particular case, in some of our discussions, we are going to mention the concept of the larger intestines, the liver, the skin, and even the lungs performing a role in this particular case for excretion. So in this particular illustration that I've given in our display consists of particularly the renal system, which basically consists of the kidneys, which are being shaped. And then we have what we refer to as ureters, the bladder, and then the urethra, which of course form what we refer to as the kidney. We're going to see that this particular set of organ is located in the lumbar region of course, the human system. And we're going to see that it plays a vital role in trying to regulate some of the intake of course, minerals and removal of metabolic wastes, as I've said. So, of course, we're going to encounter different methods of excretion in this particular case, which are going to involve the processes of diffusion, transpiration, agglutation, exudation, and even deposition, whenever we're trying to consider other forms of organisms like plants and other low-level forms of organisms. So in this case, of course, the waste materials that are going to be excluded or rather excreted from this specific system include gases and some materials. So we are going to see that excess water from the body can be considered as a waste material, carbon dioxide, nitrogenous wastes such as urea, and then we are going to see that some minerals and toxic substances as well are going to form part of this excretory or rather product of excretion. Now, the concept of homeostasis that I've mentioned ensures that the internal and the external environment of a cell are maintained, and therefore our discussion is going to roughly touch on that particular aspect that I've seen. Now, basically, as I've said, there are several areas we're going to consider, but basically we're going to be biased on the concept of excretion in man. Now, I've mentioned higher forms of organisms, and I said man falls under part of an elaborate complex system that consists of specialized tissues, which basically form this part of the entire section of the body. So the kidney is part of a specialized tissue that engages in this particular excretory mechanism that I've mentioned in this particular case. Therefore, we're going to consider different parts of this particular organ that we refer to as a kidney in a broader way, which is going to assist us understand, of course, how this kidney plays a vital role in trying to, of course, maintain balance, ionic and water balance, and other aspects like osmoregulation, and then the regulation of the pH and other roles which can be considered as part of this excretion. Now, basically, in mammals like man, man consists of two kidneys, which can be able to be seen as the ones I'm illustrating, which are, of course, bean shaped. And as I said earlier, they are found in the lumbar region of the abdominal cavity. And in color, as we can see from this, of course, they are dark shaped, dark red shaped. I hope that the color is, but there is a distinction. This particular colored part of the organs are what we refer to as the kidney. Now, overall, the kidney is going to assume a particular shape, and I'm going to use a second illustration in trying to illustrate the same. Now, the kidney, from its specific makeup, we are going to see that this particular section is basically a convex shaped, and then there's a concave shaped section at this specific point, which basically consists of a specific depression. And we're going to mention the particular names that we're going to refer to this. Of course, there are other sections of the kidney which I'm going to mention later of these particular differentiated sections that we're going to see. And this particular depression is referred to as the hilum. And this hilum forms a depression where we're going to see that this is a point of attachment of the nerves and blood vessels in organs such as the kidney that we're going to see later. So the extensions that we're seeing from this particular part of it consists of arteries and veins, which are basically the renal vein and the renal artery that we're going to see later. And then we're going to see another section that is been joined, basically, which we had referred to as a ureter at this specific point. So therefore, this renal artery basically enters the kidney to support, of course, the supply of oxygenated blood into the kidney. And this renal vein takes out the deoxygenated blood into the lungs for that particular cycle, for circulation of that blood, for the repetitive process of being oxygenated. So in this particular case, therefore, we're seeing that there is a nourishment of this particular section of the kidney from the this, of course, section that is concave, that forms what we call that depression that is known as the hilum. Now, later we're going to see that this particular section is going to be extended into the ureter and the, of course, the urinary bladder, which is going to, of course, act as a point, or rather a temporary storage point for urine before it is released into the urethra. So in other parts, we're going to see some of the particular sections that are going to be contained after the urethra. But in this case, I'd like to emphasize one of the points, especially on the general makeup of this particular one kidney. So in the internal parts that we're seeing at this specific point, this particular gap that I'm encircling is referred to as the pelvis. And then we are going to see that this outer section that is adjacent to the outer part is referred to as the cortex. And the inner part that is consisting of these branched organs that form pyramid-like sections is referred to as the medulla. So basically, the kidney consists of three specific parts. This is the pelvis, the medulla, and the cortex, the outer layer. So I'm going to look at these specific parts in an expanded form, so that we can be able to appreciate the concept of collaboration between the kidney and other parts of the blood supply system that I mentioned earlier. That is basically the renal vein and the renal artery at this specific point. So if we try to look at the general view of this particular section, this, as we had mentioned, is contained in the lumbar region of the abdominal cavity. So therefore, these two bean-shaped organs that we're seeing at this specific point are what we refer to as the right and left kidneys. And at this specific point, we have this particular two supply for blood intake and outtake of blood that we refer to as a vena cava for outtake of blood. And then we have an outer that brings in oxygenated blood into the kidneys and other sections of the body. So therefore, if you try to look at this, then we're going to have this specific section that are referred to as a ureter that is going to drain what we refer to as the metabolic waste, which basically is urea into this particular chamber that are referred to as a urinary bladder, where the urine is temporarily stored and then it's going to be released into the environment through the urethra. And then we're going to see that at this specific point that I'm encircling, there is a urinary sphincter, which basically is a constriction or a muscle that basically opens and closes to allow the release of storage and release of urine at this specific point. And we're going to see later some of the other parts of the anatomy of this specific section that we are referring to as the gallbladder and the urethra, respectively, in finer details. So I'd mentioned that basically the kidney is made up of internal parts, and in this particular kidney, inside these kidneys, we have what we call the basic functioning units, which we're going to refer to as a nephron. And therefore, I'm going to mention the specific parts that I've mentioned for the cortex, medulla, and pelvis, respectively, so that we can be able to know which are these specific roles being played by these sections of what we refer to as the kidney. Now, if we try to look at this, of course, I'm going to show other illustrations which have containing a label, but for this case, we can see that this darker region that is, of course, being illustrated here is referred to as, I said, the cortex, which is basically a point that is placed in the inner convex surface of this particular section that I had said, which forms the outer section of the kidney. Now, this section that contains the pyramid-like structures, which I'm showing, of course, are referred to it as a medulla. And this medulla is placed towards the center of the kidney, and of course, it extends to this particular curvature that I had referred to as the pelvis. Now, the pelvis, of course, is going to form a narrow, of course, constriction that is going to lead to what we refer to as the urethra, basically, which is going to form as a draining point for what has been formed, the metabolic waste that is referred to as the urea, which is being formed in these particular sections. Now, we're going to look at the section of what we refer to as the basic unit of this renal system. That is basically the nephron, which is a finer illustration of this specific section, which is going to assist us understand the functions of various parts of this specific nephron that I'm mentioning about. The kidney nephron basically consists of two specific parts, and those are the renal tubules and what we refer to as the glomerulus, or glomeruli in plural, that we're going to see in an expanded form. So this basically implies that this section of what we refer to as a functional unit, which is a nephron, is found in this particular section of the kidney. So this is a cross-section of this particular part, which I'm encircling, that consists of this particular functional unit that I've said consists of renal tubules, which we are going to see in a finer form, and what we refer to as glomeruli. So my next, of course, illustration is going to show that specific part in details, whereby we are going to see also that the renal tubules that I've mentioned, this particular part, of course, consists of afferent vessels and afferent vessels, which are going to assist in taking, of course, blood into and out of the kidney nephron, respectively. If we try to look at this specific section, of course, we're going to see a part of what we refer to as a nephron. And therefore, if I'm trying to use this particular single part of this, of course, we can see that these are just similar parts. If I'm trying to use the second part, then therefore we're going to see this specific section that I refer to as a glomerulus, and then the afferent and efferent arterioles that I've just mentioned. Now, the afferent arteriole that I had mentioned earlier basically takes blood into the kidney's nephron, and then this is going to, of course, take blood out of this particular nephron after the process of ultrafiltration that we are going to see later. Now, I'm going to mention other different parts of this particular distal convoluted tubule and cortical collecting tubules, and the loop of Henle descending part and ascending part. And then we are going to see how various parts are going to have an interplay in trying to facilitate their overall function. Now, as we can see, this is just a cross-section of the inner medulla, outer medulla, and the cortex, which basically forms part of where these sections of the functional unit referred to as the nephron are found. The illustration on the board basically is going to see show the different anatomy of this specific basic functional unit that we have referred to as the nephron, which basically we said that consists of two main parts, which are the renal tubules and the glomerulus. Now, we're going also to look at other 5 specific parts, which basically form this particular section that we have referred to as the glomerulus. which are going to, of course, assist us appreciate the overall function of this specific functional unit that we have referred to as a nephron. So in this specific section, we have what we call the loop of Henle. This is the descending and ascending loop of Henle that has got a thin section at this specific point, and this is a thick section. So basically, this particular section we refer to is as the loop of Henle. And of course, the Bowman's capsule that I've just been mentioning is this particular section that I'm indicating on this particular point. Now, I talked about the afferent and the efferent arterial, which are basically going to form part of these particular sections that I'm showing for intake and outtake of blood from this particular section of the functional unit. And therefore, at this specific point, we're going to have what we refer to as the proximal convoluted tubule, which basically is going to form the descending loop of Henle and the ascending loop of Henle. And of course, at this specific point, we're going to have another section that is going to be referred to as the distal convoluted tubule, this specific section, which is eventually going to lead into the collecting duct. Now, at these main points are the blood supply for the renal vein and the renal artery, which of course I'm trying to show basically, which have been labeled as blood vessels. Now, at this specific end, there are finer details of this cross-section of this specific walls of this the loop of Henle, the collecting duct, distal convoluted and proximal convoluted tubule, which is going to show, of course, the finer adaptations and makeup of these different sections, which basically assist in of course, excretion of what we refer to as the urine in the renal system. Now, in trying to figure out how this functional unit works, we are going to look at one of the ways that we are going to describe, as of course, as ultrafiltration, which basically occurs in this particular section that we've referred to as the Bowman's capsule and the adjacent environment that I'm trying to show at this specific point. So my next illustration is going to, of course, entail the concept of ultrafiltration, whereby we're going to, of course, see that the concept of blood pressure that is flowing into and out of this particular functional unit is going to play a role in trying to, of course, separate the molecules of waste materials and the blood, of course, from this particular kind of circulation, whereby we're going to see that molecules, of course, are going to be forced out of that specific part, and others are going to be maintained due to, of course, different sizes. And we're going to see, of course, a role of the endothelial cells of the Bowman's capsule, which are going to form what we call, of course, the filtrate that I'm going to illustrate using that specific illustration. So as I had said, of course, the basic functional unit that we had mentioned works in one of the ways that we can describe as ultrafiltration. And of course, as I said, that due to the surface area of this particular intake of the afferent arterial and the efferent arterial, of course, we're going to see that these small sections, which of course are being distributed at this specific point, are going to play a role, whereby the blood pressure that is flowing inside is going to force some of the molecules move into this section of the Bowman's capsule, of course, which are going to form the glomerular ultrafiltrate that I had mentioned, of course. From this particular section, we're going to see that there's going to be a selective movement of materials into and out of this place, depending on their nature, whereby the molecules, which of course include glucose, amino acids, mineral salts, vitamins, and tox materials, are filtered out in order to form part of what we call the waste, which is going to be, of course, taken out of the body. And now a later illustration, of course, I'd said that we have this particular section whereby we're going to have them drained in that particular section that I refer to as the collecting duct. So therefore, if we try to look at this specific makeup, then therefore we're going to see that there's a selective, of course, filtration of those particular materials, and then and some of the processes that we had mentioned earlier, like osmosis, are going to, of course, play a role in this specific part, and therefore, which is going to lead to the overall separation of the urea from other important minerals, which are going to be retaken back into the body. Now, substances excreted by the kidney, for instance, the urea, water, and salts are going to contain some kind of what we refer to as the pH. And also there are some minerals which, of course, will be required back into the body for other uses, which, of course, need to be kept. So therefore, that one plays, or rather requires us that we understand the concept of homeostasis, which basically is the process of trying to maintain the external and internal environment for the cell to work in a normal way. So in this case, the concept of course, the renal system excreting some substances from the body needs other substances to be maintained, and therefore excretion is going to have a complementary role with the process of homeostasis, which we are going to look at in our next video. So I hope that from this specific discussion and other similar discussions, we're going to appreciate the overall role of this renal system in trying to, of course, initiate or rather facilitate the exchange of materials between the body and the external environment. And this case, of course, it's going to support the overall concept of trying to ensure that the continuation of the aspect of course, survival and living, or other life in living organism is maintained. And therefore, we're also going to see how this specific concept of excretion and homeostasis is going to be influenced by other factors that we're going to encounter in other discussions in our biology lessons. So that is it for now, guys. Bye. God bless you.